clarify the record that there were 240,000 very close friends working with me in Apollo. It wasn't just me, but it was an incredible adventure, and it's such a great pleasure to be back in Virginia, my home state. It's just, I've only been around a day, and I can feel the warmth and hospitality that I miss so much in Yankee land. So let me just try to share with you some of the distance we've come and the perspective we've gotten in the last 50 years working with NASA. This past October 4th, 51 years ago, we heard this sound coming from deep space. It was just amazing. I doubt whether the majority of people in this audience actually ever were alive to hear that. Most of you are younger than this, perhaps. But it was an unbelievable sound because, for me personally, being a proto-geologist at the time, a teenager, I was actually walking around looking at the ground, looking at rocks, soon to be a geologist, no doubt. And this caused me to look up the sound. What was that? Where was that? I looked out. I found Sputnik going over my house. I was so enthralled with this thing. It was unbelievable. It was like, how could that be? And I listened also at the time. My internet at that time was shortwave radio. So I had this little Hallicrafter shortwave radio that I tuned into Radio Moscow, which was frying my hair, from a radio frequency point of view, no doubt, to get that signal all the way here. And I heard that if I really wanted to actually know when the spacecraft was going to come over my house, I should send a stamped self-addressed envelope. Actually, my name is all I had to send, to Radio Moscow, USSR, and they would send me the schedule. Oh, man, I saved up money to get my 25-cent allowance a week, to get enough stamps to send this note to the Soviet Union, Radio Moscow, USSR, sent it off, kept coming home every day from school waiting for this so I could tune in and see what was going on and look at it. And one day I came home from school, and there on the little table where we put the mail was this incredible envelope with all these Soviet space stamps on it. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is great. I looked up, and my aunt was standing there. They're giving me what I came to know as the death ray stare, okay? This is the time that I learned that she actually worked for the CIA, okay? And she was damn sure that my career, anytime, anywhere in the U.S. government was over at this point. You have to remember those times, and for those of you who don't know those times, I encourage you to go to Netflix and get October Sky. It's incredible. It really gives you an idea what was going on then. An amazing time. Fortunately, instead of being over, my career actually had just begun because, in fact, it was this fascination with space that propelled me to be not just a geologist looking at the ground, but actually a geologist looking up. This prepared me for suggestions that came later in my career. And indeed, more importantly, this was the first connection with the Soviet Union, which came to become a friendship and a collaboration that lasted for almost 50 years, actually. And so these are formative things. So let me try to share with you what's happened in those last 50 years. What kind of perspective we have now back on our own home planet Earth from 50 years of exploration. It's pretty phenomenal, and I want to show you just a quick timeline through this period and then go back and tell you actually what we've learned and what these kinds of perspectives give us in terms of a full understanding of our own home planet Earth. Well, the first thing we have to think about is the space-time continuum. This is a concept that's familiar to everybody, but a really important way to put this is actually to look at time, today and this week, the next few years, your lifetime, second generation, and space, family, city, community, nation, country, and the world. Of course, the density of the dots says where most people are. Most people are here. You're thinking about, oh, I thought it was Jeffrey Sachs this week. Is he going to be done? What did I take anything out for dinner? All these when are the kids coming home? Who's picking them up? These are the kind of things we consume ourselves with every day, okay? So that's really where we are. In fact, that's not very far at all. What has NASA done for us over 50 years? In fact, it's put us out here. 50 years of exploration has brought us way out here to the solar system and to billions of years in our perspective. Deep time, not just short time. In fact, one of the first indications of this was the Apollo astronauts looking back at the Earth and sharing with us their view of the fragileness and incredible loneliness of the Earth out there in space. Pretty phenomenal. And indeed, from this ancient woodcut here, you can see that kind of looking outside our own environment, we see new things every time we do that. And this is what the perspective that we've gained throughout this. Well, what happened? How did this happen? What kinds of things brought us to that new perspective? Well, of course, Sputnik was the first thing. the early Sputnik years, 57, 58, when the Russians were launching spacecraft. You know, this Sputnik generated awe, in my case, and fear in lots of others. I remember my parents saying that there's a Russian base over our heads, closer than the distance we go to the beach, you know, for our vacation from Washington, D.C. That was really scary. And in fact, that really propelled us into the space race. And of course, Kennedy's pronouncement and challenge to the American people was one of the things that crystallized us to action. But it wasn't a linear path. I think most of you know this. I will not show you the steps that led to this successful Explorer 1 launch. It's really not something you want to see. I mean, who likes to see rockets go up, spin around, and crash down? Who likes to see them go off on the side? The range safety officers just look like this before the launch. He's ready to push the button because he knows he's probably going to have to at that point, and they were all he's in those days, sadly. But that's the way it was. So Explorer 1, very successful. We learned about Van Allen radiation belts and other kinds of things, the beginning of space science, if you will. There was a big battle to go to the planets. Back in 1962, the Soviets launched Mars 2 and 3, 1, 2, and 3. They launched Venus missions, but they weren't successful. We had, in fact, from a very bad start with Sputnik, a incredible, successful mission in 1962 to Venus on Mariner 2. People have completely forgotten about that. It was very successful. We also got Ranger 7 in 1964, which was also a very important success as we began to prepare to understand what the moon looked like so we could actually land there and think about more broad exploration. But the critical point here is Ranger 7. We usually don't start out things with a number like that, right? It was indeed a lucky number. But what about Ranger 1 through 6? Well, I mean, we couldn't hit the damn moon, okay, is the problem, okay? Now, every Virginia farm boy knows you don't shoot at the bird, you shoot in front of the bird, okay? Because it's moving. It wasn't quite that simple, but that's what everybody felt like. We can't hit the moon. We cannot hit the moon. JPL was thinking about taking credit for 6 solar spacecraft in orbit around the sun, but decided not to really push that perspective. Lots of firsts in those days. But they came back. In fact, Mariner 4 to Mars, 1964. The Russians were having real trouble getting to Mars. The U.S. did it with Mariner 4. Got some absolutely crystal clear pictures when I look at this now with 20-centimeter resolution on the surface of Mars. It's ridiculous, but this was the first, and it gave us tons of really important new information. We began to get back on our feet after the Mariner issues and had a very, very successful surveyor program with landers onto the surface of the planet. We followed this up with Lunar Orbiter, also paving the way for Apollo. These were the data that we used in preparing the astronauts to go to the moon and understanding, in fact, where we wanted to go scientifically to accomplish this major, major undertaking. Not just flags and footprints, but fundamental scientific exploration of the moon. Of course, this led to Apollo 11 through 17, 1969 to 72, and I'll come back to those in a couple minutes. Spectacular missions. Spectacular missions. You forget about them. You forget what really went on. You forget the scientific harvest that was reaped from all this training and exploration. These were hugely intelligent people doing heroic efforts out on the surface of the moon, bringing back unbelievable amounts of data.